witness tampering, forced labor, sex trafficking, transportation for purposes of prostitution, and drug distribution. You know, yesterday we did receive a note from the jury asking about drug distribution, wanting that law reread to them. This is very interesting. They've been deliberating for almost 2 days. We know that they have reached a verdict on those other counts that you spoke of. And what are those counts? Well, those are 2 counts of sex trafficking. One when it pertains to Cassie Ventura, his girlfriend of about 11 years, who claims that Combs forced her to participate in drug-fueled sex parties known as freak-offs. Prosecutors have to prove force, fraud, or coercion when it comes to those charges. The other one pertains to Jane. Now, that is not her real name. She testified under a pseudonym. She actually dated Combs up until his arrest in September. And there are those 2 counts of the Mann Act, transportation to engage in prostitution. We heard from several escorts taking the stand. We know that Combs paid for those escorts on some of his own credit cards. And the question is, did he use company money to pay for some of those acts? Also, this is very interesting. The judge is now asking the jury to go back and deliberate. He has told them something called an Allen charge, right, where he wants them to go back again and try to continue to deliberate. But we know from this note that there is more than one juror who is, as of right now, unwilling to change their position. Now, something that's really interesting here is that I was in that courtroom almost every single day, and I had my eyes on those jurors. And I have said all along that I did not think that they would reach a unanimous verdict on RICO. That is because during some of the testimony from the prosecutor's witnesses, remember they called 34, several of them appeared to look not in agreement with the prosecution, some smirking, some appearing to roll their eyes during different testimony. So we knew that this was always going to be difficult for them to reach a unanimous verdict. Now, when I was in there for closing arguments, Mark Agnifilo, one of Combs' defense attorneys, his lead defense attorney, delivering closings on Friday, and at one point eliciting laughter from the jurors and the courtroom. He said that Cassie is actually the winner here, that she was the one that walked away with a $20 million settlement. Remember, this all started when Cassie Ventura filed that explosive civil suit against Combs in November 2023. That was the first time that anyone had heard that she had been in a violent relationship with Combs. And during her testimony, 4 days on the stand, heavily pregnant with her 3rd child, she testified about years of physical and emotional abuse. We saw photographs of her badly beaten over the course of her relationship. But really what this comes down to is consent. Do these 12 jurors believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Cassie and Jane were forced to participate in these freak-offs? There were damning text messages from both Cassie and Jane saying that they wanted to participate in these freak-offs. We even heard in closings from Mark Agnifilo call Cassie and Combs' relationship a great modern love story. So again, we do not know what the verdict is on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, but on one, the one that carries up to a life sentence, they are still having to deliberate on that.
And Chloe, do you get a sense that the judge will hold the verdicts and not reveal those while he is intending to have the jurors go back and press on and do more work on that count that you described as being perhaps hard? Well, we know it's hard because they've told the court they can't reach a unanimous verdict. And it's hard in part because it is the sweeping enterprise of a criminal conspiracy, not just the interpersonal conduct that some of the other counts are dealing with. Do you get a sense that they'll go right back to work today, or will they come back tomorrow? Do you have any of those sort of tick-tock moments for us?
It's hard to say because, they deliberated until 5 o'clock yesterday. They have the right to keep going. We know that they don't have court on Thursday and Friday, but that potentially, they could continue to deliberate if they want to. I will tell you, this is what the judge just said. He said, can you both send me your proposed instructions, meaning from the prosecution and the defense, send to Chambers' inbox, meaning their email, and we will take it from there. We have 3 options. Defense suggesting to keep going. Second proposal is some version of a modified Allen charge, right? That's to tell the jury that it is their duty to continue to deliberate. And a third option, at some point, the court advises the jury to return a partial verdict. But I don't think we're at that stage. Let me tell you something really interesting about that. This is very reminiscent of just a few weeks ago when I was at a courthouse right around the corner, but it wasn't federal, it was state. And it was Harvey Weinstein's criminal retrial. Remember, he was first tried, Harvey Weinstein, in 2017, his conviction overturned, and he was retried. And the jury could not reach a verdict on one of the women. Okay, so you had a hung on one with Jessica Mann, you had a guilty on another, and a not guilty on a third. So again, you could see the jurors sticking to their guns, saying that they are very far off here. And it sounds like it is more than one juror, but it looks like potentially today they may stop deliberating and come back tomorrow. But again, this is breaking, very significant news that they quite quickly came to a verdict on counts 2 through 5. But on that racketeering conspiracy charge, it is the most complicated. I do want to also tell you that some of Combs' family have arrived. His daughters have just arrived. He's had about 6 of his children. He has 7 total, the 7th being the youngest, an infant, at the courthouse a lot. And we saw them all there, all 6 of them, during closing arguments. They've been a united force. And someone that's been in that courtroom nearly every single day is Mama Combs, his mother. And just a short time ago, I actually shared an elevator with Mark Agnifilo, the lead attorney for Combs. I shook his hand. I spoke to him for a few minutes. He seemed calm, cool, and collected, like he always does. And that was what he knew. What I didn't know was that there was another note from the jury, and he was making his way to the courtroom on the 26th floor of the federal courthouse right there behind me. I also just want to describe the scene for you right here in front of the courthouse. It's raining, as you can see. I'm getting drips of rain on my face. But there are a lot of people now gathered outside. I like to call them citizen journalists. They are people that are streaming all of this coverage day in, day out for the last 2 months on TikTok, on social media. A lot of influencers here. Some people are wearing Free Puff T-shirts. We know that one of his children actually wore a shirt saying Free Puff the other day when he went into the courtroom, and he's not supposed to do that, and he had to change. But again, the feeling down here, palpable. People are fascinated by this trial, and obviously this has been over a year and a half since Cassie first filed that civil suit, and we have been waiting for this moment ever since.
Chloe, your in-person experience there is taking me back to when I covered the O.J. Simpson trial. So I completely relate to what you're describing about things you pick up by watching the jurors, things that are happening as a part of sort of the environment that you're in. And certainly this is something where there's no substitute for the kind of day in, day out assessment as an observer of this case that you bring to it. So I thank you for that. Hang in here with us. I also want to tap into the knowledge of our legal analyst, Angela Senandela, who can give us a sense of when you hear this breakdown of the jury unable to reach a decision on count 1, the racketeering, but having reached decisions on the other counts. What does that say to you?
So honestly, it does say to me in a mirror fashion what Chloe said, and frankly, what Chloe has said all along, having been in that courtroom, that perhaps this RICO charge is just too confusing, too sprawling. There are too many pieces that have to be put together in order for the jury to get there. Now, look, as a lawyer, when I look at the definitions of what is required to get a conviction in RICO, I believe the prosecution got there, but they don't have to sway me, right? They have to sway 12 people on that jury to think that he used the benefits, the fruits of his businesses in order to create crimes. And if you look at the enterprise of just his assistants and the people who work for him, who have repeatedly testified to having, for example, used Combs's money to pay off bribes or to keep information from coming out, to me, that does count as conspiracy. That counts as racketeering. But it is very confusing. They brought in all of these state crimes in an attempt to wrap it up and roll it up in this racketeering charge, and that is very confusing. Now, in terms of them coming to an agreement pretty quickly on 2, 3, 4, and 5, the sex trafficking and the interstate prostitution, I am going to guess that they are coming down with a guilty verdict on those. And the reason for me is because of that video that the prosecution played over and over again so repeatedly, while also clarifying to the jury that the only requirement in a case of sex trafficking to try to prove this charge is that force, fraud, or coercion was used in order to further a commercial sex act. And if you see that video and you believe Cassie's testimony that she was trying to leave a freak off when that violence happened, and you see it and you see him physically pulling him back in, I mean, how can you not think that's force, fraud, or coercion? I mean, that said,
well,
also
that's your
jurors,
analysis. That's your analysis. We don't want to get ahead of the jury because it is ultimate. They are the finders of fact in this. But certainly
true.
people understand that is compelling evidence, according to the prosecution, because it does allow people to see some of these events. Very different than the RICO charge, which does require sort of connecting the dots, using his money, using his employees, those sorts of things in a conspiracy. RICO is often applied in very different contexts. Here we have a music mogul with a lot of money and a lot of power and a lot of celebrity friends. Do you get a sense that the celebrity factor and the money factor, as it often does have an influence in criminal justice, that played out here in your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely impossible not to, but at the same time, jurors are always unpredictable, right? So you're not entirely sure in which way that affects them. Does the juror see the celebrity and think that the celebrity meant that they were, legitimately amazing in many ways, and that he was really a musician, and that they see him on their TV, they see him on their music, on their Spotifys, and so as a result, do they think, oh, that money was really meant for legitimate purposes? Well, as you know, the definition of a RICO charge still allows for that money to be used for legitimate businesses, so long as some of it is also used to further illegitimate businesses. But when you're dazzled by celebrity, I think it's impossible for anyone not to. It could go either way, right? And I also think the defense was extremely vigorous in saying that, look, jury, you should not punish Diddy because of his kinky fetishes, right? Or just the choices that he might have made. And you might think, oh, celebrities are different. So you might perhaps then give celebrities somehow some benefit of the doubt that they live a different lifestyle. And so thus you are not going to place your own moral judgment on their activity. And so it could really go both ways with regards to celebrity.
So many human dimensions to this. And this trial and the testimony therein has certainly taken many Americans into a world they were not that familiar with. Thank you, Angela. Let me go back to Chloe. You've had a moment to catch your breath. I know the rush of when you get word of a major development in a case. There's a lot coming at you. And I know you've been able to be in touch with people who are in the courtroom and so forth. So before we hand off to the next hour, because this news will continue, I just want to check back in with you to see where are you at this moment in terms of what we should expect or any updates.
Right. So we're unclear if the jury is going to continue to deliberate today and what exactly is going to be happening next on that front when it comes to charge one. But I do count one. But I do want to talk to you about the mood in the courtroom right now. According to our court reporter who is inside right now, and some of our journalists who are also in other parts of the courthouse watching on something like a feed, the cameras inside, Combs appears to be very somber. Two of his attorneys sitting down, including Tenny Garagos, the daughter of a very famous celebrity attorney, Mark Garagos, who at one point represented Combs, looking dejected. And that is an exact quote. So again, perhaps they were hoping for hung on a few other charges, right? And so I think that it's very, very interesting that we are waiting on this racketeering charge, because like I said, it's been pretty fascinating to watch the jurors' faces for all of these weeks. And really, they say don't read the tea leaves here, and you never really know what jurors are thinking, so don't try to get in their minds. But again, it's been very obvious that some of them just have not been on board with the prosecution.
Well, and all of that leads to how you assess what you saw in the courtroom, and certainly being dejected or looking down. This is a very stressful event, regardless of the outcome. So we will wait for more word. Thank you, Chloe. Appreciate your expertise on this. Angela, as we go into it, do you think the court will allow for an announcement of the last couple of counts very quickly here, or do you expect the court to require them to again go back and deliberate further?
I expect that the court will require them to go back and deliberate tomorrow. And hopefully tomorrow they will come to a decision so that then the prosecution does not have to decide whether or not they want to rebring those charges or drop them.
Well, we will be following all of this. And thank you for your knowledge and insight on this. And we will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. But the news, and there's a lot of it, continues with Hallie Jackson coming right up.
Hey, I'm Hallie, and tonight we are coming on the air yet again with breaking news, this time from that bombshell trial in New York with the jury in Diddy's sex trafficking trial apparently reaching a partial verdict in just the last couple of minutes. Notice we said partial verdict. This is on counts 2 through 5, but not count 1. As the judge, here's what's happening inside the courthouse you're looking at now. The judge is considering what the next move should be here, right? Now that there is a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts Diddy is facing. Again, a live look there outside court. We've got a verdict on charges 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to talk through what that means, but they do include sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution charges. We're missing count 1. That's the racketeering conspiracy charge. It comes after earlier today, jurors had asked for transcripts of some really important testimony involving what Cassie Ventura said, Diddy's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Remember, that was that very high-profile, incredibly emotional, and at times graphic testimony from the first days of this trial about those so-called freak-offs. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all the charges he's facing. His team says all the sexual encounters he had were consensual. So I want to bring in Chloe Malas, our correspondent who's been covering this from the jump, Danny Savalos, our legal analyst. And just to set the scene here, Chloe, right now, I believe what we're waiting for is the judge to make a decision on whether he's going to send the jury back to keep deliberating on count 1. And it sounds like from what he said in court that is likely to be the option here. He said something along the lines of like, there hasn't been enough time yet for the jury to come back sort of stuck or deadlocked on count 1 here. How long do we think it'll be before we know what the next step will be? Do we have any idea?
Hey there, Hallie. I mean, look, we're going to know imminently what is going to happen, and it's very likely that the judge is going to issue this Allen charge tonight, and if the jury wants to continue to deliberate, that is really up to their discretion. I mean, you and I have been talking all along for the last 2 months, almost every single night, right? And I keep telling you that I stare straight into the faces of those 12 jurors, including the alternates, and I have said that there has been a look of dissent from some of the individuals on the jury when the prosecutors have put up some of those 34 witnesses, some rolling their eyes, some to really not be buying everything, especially when it came to the racketeering, the RICO conspiracy. And I'll tell you why. Because among the things that the government has to prove, they have to prove 2 illegal activities, which are predicate crimes, which we've talked about so much with Danny Savalos, who's basically given me a law class over the last year and a half. But they've had to prove racketeering, kidnapping, arson, bribery, witness tampering, forced labor. I mean, again, we have heard all sorts of testimony over the last nearly 8 weeks. And this is very complicated. And obviously, this is the one that carries up to a life sentence. This is by far perhaps the most important charge. And so in a way, it might be a good thing that they're hung right now because there's still a chance as they're deliberating from the defense's perspective. Remember, they have always said that Combs did not run a criminal enterprise. But on the flip side, the prosecution has said that Combs had a kingdom, that he had all sorts of assistants and people working for him, carrying out illegal activity, like the arson of Kid Cudi's car, like transporting drugs when Jane, one of his girlfriends, flew from California to Miami with drugs more than once that was allegedly at Combs's behest. But again, his legal team saying all along that these were one-off criminal acts, these were personal use drugs. And if you look at one of the jury notes from just yesterday, at the end of the day, it had to do with the 8th predicate crime of drug distribution, that they wanted that law read back to them, Hallie. But again, very interesting that they have come to a unanimous verdict on counts 2 through 5. Those are 2 counts of sex trafficking and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. And lastly, though, I just want to say, I mean, we did hear from 2 different escorts. We saw bank statements. We saw flight records. We saw hotel room charges on Combs's credit cards. We saw text messages of Combs with Cassie Ventura, with Jane, who is a former girlfriend of his who testified under a pseudonym to protect her identity, acknowledging that he knew that he was hiring these escorts. But in closing arguments, you heard Mark Agnifilo say, well, these were entertainers, right? This was his personal sex life. You don't want the government in your bedroom. He was paying for their time, their companionship. The prosecution said, on the contrary, he knew what he was doing, and this was transportation to engage in prostitution.
Chloe, stand by for a second. Obviously, hang for as long as you can. I want to pull back the curtain here for just a second for people because Chloe's outside court. We've got a producer in the room, and that's Adam Reese, and we are getting word in real time. Again, can't have cameras in court. We're getting word in real time about what's happening, and we understand that the judge is now back. So they are now discussing what should happen next. And before the judge walked back in, it's sort of a fascinating look to what's happening at these tables. Sean Combs, Diddy, turned around, looked at his family, gave him a thumbs up. put his sort of hands together in like a praying motion here as this is all going down. And what is obviously, Danny, a very tense moment for both the prosecution and the defense, with word that the jury has come back on verdicts for 4 of the counts, but not the most serious one. I think it's fair to say. When Chloe mentions something, Danny, like an Allen charge, can you in plain English explain what does that mean? What would the judge be doing?
Sure, an Allen charge, and it has different versions in the states, but it essentially tells the jury, go back there and work harder, really try to reach a verdict, examine your views, and no other jury could do it as well as you could. The reason defense attorneys like me almost uniformly reject these or object to them is because what Allen charges do in our mind is convince jurors who might be deadlocked, who might be, if you have a minority group of jurors who are for acquittal, they might be harangued and convinced and pushed into changing their verdict. So the general rule of thumb for defense attorneys is we usually object to Allen charges. We would rather at this point, if we think we're facing a conviction, we would rather a mistrial. But really, we're just playing the odds, and we're playing on odds that we don't really fully understand because we don't know what's going on in there.
Typically, Danny, you and I have talked about this before. It is not at all uncommon that if a jury comes back and says we can't get to a verdict, the judge will do something like this, right? Send them back and tell them try again. Typically, the first time they come back and say we can't quite get there, that's not usually the final one.
Exactly right. Yes. And in fact, he may send them back without an Allen charge. It's hard to say. But it's when they really indicate, look, we are deadlocked. Then you probably give the Allen charge. And then if they come back after that, after a few times, but again, it's totally up to the judge. It could be a couple times. It could be several times. It really, really depends on the judge handling the case and his feeling about the jury and obviously what each side objects to and doesn't object to. But the goal is to get them to get to a verdict and to avoid a mistrial. The problem for that, as defense attorneys see it, is that the idea of efficiency, the desire to avoid a mistrial, shouldn't trump the rights of the defendant, and especially if there is a minority of jurors who are for acquittal. We would rather a mistrial at that point than have those minority of jurors be swayed into a unanimous guilty verdict.
If in fact, and then I want to go to Angela Sinadella, but Danny, if in fact they remain deadlocked on count 1, is it possible, like counts 2 through 5, is it possible those could also be a split verdict? In other words, just because they've reached a verdict on those counts doesn't mean the verdict is the same for each count, right?
It could be in theory, but I've been saying for weeks, I believe the jury would come to a relatively quick verdict on all counts except count 1. And I say that only because there is more than enough evidence to meet these elements. The transportation, count 5 and count 3, for example, the elements boiled down are basically, was there transportation and was there prostitution? There is evidence, both documentary evidence and witness evidence, eyewitness evidence. They actually have escorts who came in and testified. You don't get that very often. And yet they came in and testified. So has the government at least put in enough evidence to sustain a guilty verdict? Yes. The other reason I think it might be all guilties is because presumably if we're talking about RICO and some of the predicate crimes are these crimes, well, then that tells me that they at least have found the predicate crimes, because the predicate crimes for RICO are these other crimes, at least some of them. This is just me kind of playing guess at what's going on in there. But I think the odds are if they've reached a guilty verdict, they might have split, for example, if they found Jane not believable or they found Cassie Ventura more believable. That might be a split. But I just, in light of all the other evidence that the government put in, they didn't rest their case. Their case did not live and die on the credibility of Jane, nor did it on Cassie Ventura. So even if the jury found Jane, for example, to be not credible, they had plenty of other evidence with which to sustain a verdict.
I should note that as we're getting these sort of live readbacks from what's happening in the room, there's now a conversation happening between the judge, the prosecution, the defense about not just what happens from here. And again, it sounds like, as we've said earlier, that both sides are in agreement. They want the jury to try to deliberate more on count one here, but also now about schedule, because I don't have to remind everybody here, July 4th is coming up quick on a Friday. Court is not in session on Friday. So there will be, if the jury does not have a decision by the end of the day, July 3rd, a potentially break. So it looks like they're sort of having a discussion around timing on that. Angela, let me go to you, because while count one, this racketeering conspiracy charge that Danny's been talking about, is certainly, by all accounts, the most complicated. It's just an involved count here. Count two, sex trafficking, that also carries a maximum sentence of life in prison, a minimum of 15 years. So these other counts do carry some significant weight as this jury is working to decide, quite literally the fate of Sean Combs moving forward.
Yeah, you're right. So counts 2, 3, 4, 5 do all contain actual penalties, right? So there's possible sentences that attach to all of these that could leave Combs in jail still for possibly the rest of his life. But I think what is interesting here with this RICO charge is that not only is it complicated, but everybody associates it with the mob, right? Because that is what it has been traditionally used for. That is what I first had experience with in law school when I was interning at the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of New York. And really, what it comes down to is that these people are understanding that the mob might not be Combs, right? That the mob is a criminal enterprise that has just their feet and their legs and everything. But I think that that correlation is possibly throwing the jury, because when I look at the actual legal definition of what is required to prove this RICO charge, I think personally that the prosecutors didn't meet it. But it is so complex. It is so sprawling. And if you have in your mind, this is usually what is used against the mob, it is hard to cross apply here, Hallie.
Angela, stand by for a second. I think we have our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett, who is joining us now, and I'll know if that's actually true if we see her pop up. And I think I hear her.
Me.
So, okay, good. I can certainly hear you on that. So, Laura, part of this, too, I think you can't ignore the backdrop of what we've seen over the last 24 hours, which is this other note, the first or second note that came in from the jury about a juror that was not following the judge's instructions, and some concern there, which gave you a little bit of a glimpse behind closed doors at clearly some degree of disagreement that may have been resolved or may not. Now here we are, and this partial verdict has come out. Give us a sense of your takeaways on that.
Yeah, it seems like that has come back to rear its head, Hallie. I always thought that was curious, given that just an hour in, the foreman reported, look, somebody's saying they cannot follow the instructions. And I think if I'm a lawyer for either side, that's troubling. Interestingly, the judge did not bring that juror in and lecture them in person. Instead, they just sent a note back saying, do your job, follow the instructions, get it done. And then we didn't hear anything else, which was also curious. We know that they wanted to see the transcripts of some of the testimony. We know that they had trouble with some aspect of the drug distribution and whether a sale was required or not. They heard that a sale was actually not required on the drug issue, which is one of those so-called predicate crimes, which falls under the racketeering. So it's always hard to glean exactly which way they're going to fall on something like this, given that it does sound like that there is unanimity on at least the counts as it relates to the trafficking and the prostitution. I would imagine the judge is going to say, look, you've been working hard. We understand there are tough issues here. Go back. Come back, in the morning with a clear head, try again, and try to reach unanimity on that last charge. Now, it can easily be the case. We've seen this time and again. The judge does that. They come back tomorrow and they say, Judge, we are still hung on that. Yeah. In that case, we will find out the verdict on those other 4 counts. It's not as if this whole case goes away, right? We will find out what the jury is thinking, at least on those other 4 counts at some point. But I do imagine the judge is going to try to, again, they're working out the language on the details here, but the judge is going to try to give them some admonition to make them keep continuing to work on this.
Can I ask you to hang tight for 1 second, Laura? I know you've got a lot going on, but I want to point out that the jury's coming back in the room. The judge is now calling the jury back into the room, which means we're getting close. Let me bring Chloe Malas back into the conversation as she is outside court. I should also note Diddy's family has returned to the courtroom now. Diddy has been sitting with his defense attorneys. At one point, they were huddling. They were hugging, in fact, some of the defense attorneys hugging each other. So I think everybody's on pins and needles to see what happens from here. Talk us through what else we're learning from inside court.
Hey there. So I was actually inside the courthouse watching as they were reading this note from the jury just a little bit ago, and Combs looking incredibly dejected. He put his head in his hands at one point, rubbing his eyes, looking at the floor. Like you said, his attorneys huddled around him, two of his attorneys kind of embracing each other. At one point, you could see Brian Steele, who was one of the 8 attorneys who joined later in this process, right before the trial, a very famous attorney out of Atlanta, Georgia, really talking with his hands very intensely. Everyone, you can feel the palpable energy in there. So now the jury, like you said, is coming back into the courtroom, Hallie, and we know that the judge is going to instruct them that he's going to have to read them the Allen charge, like Laura Jarrett was just talking about, and that they will be coming back most likely tomorrow to continue to deliberate. But like you said, this butts up right against the 4th of July holiday. But both the prosecutors and Combs' defense team have agreed that although there was not supposed to be court on July 3rd, they were giving the jury the day off to have a longer weekend, that they both agreed that they are fine with the jury continuing to deliberate on Thursday. In fact, they would want that given the long holiday weekend before they would potentially come back on Monday. Again, the judge can read the Allen charge more than once. So if they continue to be hung tomorrow, he could do it again. We've seen that before in other trials before he's willing to take a partial verdict.
Let me fill everybody in on what we're getting. And again, this is as of about 10 seconds ago inside the building behind you, Chloe, as we have Angela and Danny with us as well. The jury has walked back in the room. We understand that Sean Combs, as he stood to watch them walk in, was watching as they filed into the jury box and took their seats. The judge is now addressing members of the jury. These are not direct quotes. I'm paraphrasing here. But the judge welcomed them back and said, I ask that you keep deliberating, essentially. He reminded them of the instructions that they should be given. He reminded them they shouldn't hesitate to change an opinion when convinced, weigh your opinion dispassionately, reminding them the verdict must be unanimous, that they need to follow his instructions and make their own decision. I think the question now, Danny, is what the timeline will be. Just as a logistical note, given that it's 5:15 on the East Coast in New York, and typically court has wrapped up around 5, likely that he sends them home, they sleep on it, they come back in the morning to pick this back up?
It is likely. I mean, I have had federal judges keep the jury around till 11 o'clock at night, but that is a huge anomaly. More likely than not, these folks will be released. They will head home and probably come back. And they may come back relatively quickly. As you said, sleep on it, come back, and arrive at a relatively quick verdict. It's really hard to say, but I really don't see the judge keeping this jury all that much longer. And just going back to something we all mentioned earlier, interestingly enough, the RICO charge is not the most dangerous in terms of time for Combs. The most dangerous in terms of sentencing time, is count 2 any of the sex trafficking counts, because they have that mandatory minimum of 15 years. So that's something to look out for. And that's why Combs is probably very, very nervous right now.
Yeah, as the judge has, again, just to bring people up to speed, the judge has told the jury now, keep deliberating. The jury has now walked back out. It sounds as though he told them to go back to the jury room. If you're done for the day, I'll dismiss you. So we're still waiting on some of the wrap-up stuff. But the big headline, of course, is that after getting to a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5 in this bombshell trial of Sean Combs, the jury is deadlocked for the moment on count 1. So it is only a partial verdict here. They will continue to deliberate on count 1, which is the most complicated charge, as we've talked about here. That is racketeering conspiracy. I think we can bring up a list of charges here. And as you see on the left side of your screen, it has been quite the scene outside court. You've had Diddy's family members who have been in court for many days. Diddy himself has had conversations, has turned around as he's in court, looked at his family members, made gestures to his family members, a thumbs up, for example, even in just the last hour as this has started to develop, as we received word of this note from the jury just about an hour ago now. I want to bring in Angela Senadella here because, Angela, it is tough to say how quickly and how many opportunities this jury will get if they remain deadlocked on this first count here. Can you tell us, based on your experience, the timeline of other cases here? Does the jury get, if they come back tomorrow morning and say, we still can't come to a decision, do they get sent back to keep deliberating? How many times might a judge go through that exercise before it becomes clear that they are deadlocked?
I mean, Danny might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think generally it is one time. It's one more time after the Allen charge that usually the judge will give. And if by the end of the day tomorrow, I believe they don't even have court scheduled on Thursday before the Friday holiday. And look, if by the end of tomorrow they cannot come to a decision and they really say we are fully hung, I am going to guess that the judge would likely then declare that first count to be a mistrial.
If that were the case, Angela, and I realize we're in the realm of speculation here, but just so we can all get our heads straight ahead of tomorrow, counts 2 through 5 would then be read, correct?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So then counts 2 through 5 would be read, and then the prosecutors would have a choice whether or not they wanted to bring count 1 again or to dismiss those charges. And just given how sprawling we all saw this RICO charge was and how much testimony it required, I would guess that they would be unlikely to bring this RICO charge again, especially given the victims and the anonymity required and just how harrowing it is for these victims to have to testify repeatedly.
Angela,
and also note there's still civil lawsuits happening.
That's right. And we'll talk about that. But let me just tell you that we now understand from inside court, the jury has told the judge they're done for the day. They will come back tomorrow, 9 a.m. So this resolves, I think, what we've seen over the course of the last 90 minutes. And while I bring in Chloe Malas here, let me just recap for folks so you're up to speed. Just about a couple of minutes after 4 o'clock, a note came in from the jury. The note suggested that they had reached a verdict on 4 of the 5 counts that Diddy faces. We don't know what that verdict is. They said they could not come to a unanimous verdict on count 1. The judge then brought the judge, the defense, the prosecution. They had a conversation about this in court. Everybody essentially agreed that the jury should try to keep deliberating on that first count. That is what happened. The judge brought the jury into the room, told him, hey, go back in there. I'm going to ask you to keep deliberating. Think about the instructions that I gave you. If you become convinced, you can feel free to change your opinion if you, in fact, so desire that. The jury went back into the room, said, okay, we're done. Back tomorrow morning. That has been, Chloe, a fairly dramatic 90 minutes, to say the least, in the course of this case. Talk us through some of the expectations for tomorrow and what else you're seeing outside court as it's wrapping up now.
That's right. Well, first of all, they are going to be returning tomorrow, like you said, and the judge wants to give them up to 3 tries to try to come to a unanimous verdict. Again, I want to just explain to you the significance of what just happened moments ago when I was inside the overflow room, which is where media and members of the public in a packed courtroom watch what's going on TV screens. And I was sitting next to my fellow journalist and NBC News colleague, Rahema, and we were both looking at the screen and we looked at each other and we said, something is going on. His attorneys huddled around him like a scene out of a movie. And he was sitting there in white, all of his attorneys wearing dark suits, looking very serious, just standing over him. I look forward to you all being able to see what I saw in courtroom sketches, which we should be getting later this evening. But again, Combs physically at one point holding that note, on a small piece of paper and reading it to himself. At one point rubbing his eyes and shaking his head and looking at the floor. Shortly thereafter, several of his children came into the courtroom, 3 of his daughters who were there for closing arguments on Friday. And again, Hallie, we have talked about this every single night of this trial, that the racketeering charge here is so complicated. And during all the different testimony from those 34 witnesses talking about Kid Cudi's car, arson, the security guard at the Intercontinental Hotel in 2016 being paid off by Combs, $100,000 for 2 security guards to make sure that video that we've now all seen of Cassie Ventura brutally being beaten in a hotel hallway by Combs never saw the light of day. And that video was a central piece of evidence for the prosecution that they played multiple times. But there were moments during these last nearly 2 months where some of these jurors did not look convinced. And I've said it multiple times to you. And Danny Ceballos has always said, Chloe, I warn you, do not try to read the tea leaves of these jurors' expressions. But they were so overt. right? You had some jurors rolling their eyes, shaking their head during some of the prosecution's witnesses. And remember, Combs didn't call a single witness. He did not testify in his own defense. Right. After nearly 2 months of this trial, they rested their case in 30 minutes. And it'll be interesting to see if that is a decision that they stand by when this trial is all over.
Chloe, thank you. Danny, let me go to you because Chloe referenced that video and we played a small snippet of it that was central to the story of Cassie Ventura and what she testified to. One of the other notes that the jury submitted today was about seeing more of the transcript around that moment, right, of the testimony in the days before and after that moment. When that came out, I wonder how you, wearing your sort of defense attorney hat, obviously not on this case, but just in your day job, how did you read that? What did that signal to you if you're looking at that as a tea leaf?
Yeah, if we're talking about the video itself, I mean, the prosecution, the government is very, very good at introducing evidence that is devastating to a defendant's character. And the government's theory of introducing the hotel video was that it was part of the, essentially part of the racketeering conspiracy. It was part of the sex trafficking because he's essentially forcing her to come back to a freak-off with violence, even though this is something that happened back in 2016, and it would never be chargeable now by the federal government. That's a great example of the federal government being excellent at introducing evidence that they know is devastating to Combs. And then in addition, you have the evidence that he allegedly paid off hotel personnel. And that, of course, is fantastic for the government because it shows awareness of what's going on. And even the image of like the brown bag with the cash stuffed into it. Everyone on the jury, they may not understand RICO conspiracies, but they've all seen mafia movies, and they all understand handing over $100,000 in cash in a brown paper bag. They get it, and the government knows it. They're very good at this kind of theater. And yet, you know, the defense argued that, hey, wait a minute, he didn't pay off the mayor, he didn't pay off a senator, he paid off some guy. There's no ongoing investigation. This was not, this again, they minimized it. This is just a strange alternate lifestyle. It may be deplorable. It may not be something you would do, but it is not a federal crime. It's certainly not these complex federal crimes. And of course, as expected, here we are with the jury struggling with the most complicated charge in this case, one that the verdict form took up far more page space than any of the other counts verdicts. So in all likelihood, again, I'm often wrong when I forecast, but I would expect that this might be a case where the jury has reached verdicts of guilty on counts 2 to 5. I could be wrong. I may be eating those words. Sure. And of course, I am not surprised that they are struggling with the most complicated count, sure, count 1, racketeering conspiracy. Even lawyers struggle with it. It's that hard to understand.
So, Angela, final thoughts to you here. As I should note, Sean Combs, his team, they're sort of cleaning up, finishing up for the day, about to walk out. As we said, his family had returned to the courtroom to hear this note being read. Combs himself, obviously sitting there with his defense team. The prosecution remained seated as there was some discussion. Chloe laid out some of that color from inside court, some discussion around this note, what it would mean, et cetera. Now we know the result. We're all going to be watching starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow to see what happens. Talk me through your expectations and what is next for Diddy, no matter how this verdict turns out. You alluded to those civil cases here. No matter what the decision is from this jury, he will continue to face legal challenges moving forward.
Yeah, so one of the interesting parts of this RICO charge is that any money from any of those enterprises, if he's convicted, would then go to the government, right? So in theory, then he would be totally broke at the end of this. But then also remember, there are dozens of civil lawsuits that are outstanding that have really been on pause until this criminal trial completes itself. And then those civil lawsuits could possibly then also eliminate, right, a bulk, if not all, of his savings, his money, his profit. So if you think about what is the future for Diddy, it looks pretty bleak in all regards. He will likely be behind bars if 2 through 5 are guilty, like many people here are suggesting, and for the rest of his life, right? Very possibly. And then he will also likely have no money. So future is bleak.
Angela Senadella, thank you for your expertise. Danny Savalos, thank you as well. Our thanks also to Chloe Malas and to Laura Jarrett, who scrambled to join us for that big developing news. We're going to have more on that as we learn it tomorrow. But we've also got to get to our other big story of the day, right here in Washington, with the fate of that massive mega bill now in the hands of the House, where Republican leaders are promising they're going to try to work fast to get this bill to the White House by the 4th of July. Listen to the House Speaker.
Do you have the votes? We got more work to do, but it's going to get done. Can this get passed by the end of the week? That's the plan.
That's the plan, he says. That's after this thing squeaked by in the Senate, just barely, after a record 27-hour vote-a-rama to wrap it all up. Here's the big finale moment.
The yeas are 50. The nays are 50. The Senate being evenly divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative. The bill as amended is passed.
So there it was, Vice President J.D. Vance showing up at the Capitol to break that 50-50 tie after 3 Republicans sided with all 47 Democrats. So a reminder, if this thing does get through the House and passes, the bill will extend those 2017 tax cuts for a decade. It'll slash more than $1 trillion effectively from Medicaid and food assistance programs like SNAP, potentially kicking nearly 12 million people off their insurance within a decade. It'll also let the feds spend billions more on immigration enforcement. I want to bring in our Capitol Hill correspondent, Melanie DeZanona, who was on Capitol Hill. Tacos for dinner, we know, probably also for breakfast after that overnighter. And you've still got more work ahead because while House leadership sounds confident, there are some rumblings from some in the rank and file. How seriously should the White House, should the president be taking those rumblings? Is this bill really in jeopardy?
Yeah, I mean, given the fact that there is a super slim margin in the House, there is very little room for error. They're trying to move very quickly to pass this and get it on Trump's desk by July 4th. So they have to take some of these concerns seriously. There are, by our count, over a dozen Republicans at this point who have said they have some type of concern with this bill. They're either leaning against it or a no right now. That ranges from moderates who are concerned about the steep Medicaid cuts, and we should note the Senate version actually goes even further than the House product in terms of cutting Medicaid. And then you have fiscal conservatives who don't think that the spending cuts go far enough. Now, I will point out, though, these members have been known to fold in the past. They'll make a lot of noise, try to get some assurances and concessions, and ultimately vote for this bill. And that is because Donald Trump is expected to be the driving force behind this bill. There's just going to be so much pressure to fall in line. He has already threatened to primary some of the people who voted against him, like Thomas Massey. He's threatening to vote against this bill in the House when it comes back again. So there's a lot of different dynamics at play. But like you said, the confidence right now is pretty high among the leadership that they'll be able to muscle this through. They feel like they got this big boost of momentum by being able to pass it in the Senate, and that the wind is at their backs. But they still have a lot of work cut out for them here in the House.
It passed in the Senate partly because the senator from Alaska ended up voting for this bill after she got some, I don't know, concessions specifically for Alaska. I want to play this exchange, and I know you've seen it with your colleague and mine, Ryan Nobles, and Senator Lisa Murkowski, who, again, ended up voting yes after some cajoling from Senate leadership. Listen to this. We're going to play the whole thing.
Senator Paul said that that your vote was a bailout for Alaska at the expense of the rest of the